I never thought I'd find myself so close to him. Damian Winters, the enigma, the legend. I was supposed to uncover his secrets, not fall for them. It wasn't supposed to go this way. When my editor handed me the assignment, I thought it would be just another job. Damian Winters, the elusive Oscar-winning director who had disappeared from the public eye years ago. There were rumors, of course, and my job was clear. Investigate the man behind the myth. Dig deep into his past. Expose whatever skeletons were locked away in that mansion of his. It was a simple assignment, a scoop that could put me on the map. But from the moment I met him, everything changed. Before I continue with the rest of the story, kindly do me a little favor. Please hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to comment your favorite part of the story below. I love reading your thoughts and reactions. They truly keep me going. Let's get back to the gist. I'd been to countless interviews, sat through meetings with celebrities, and had my fair share of confrontations with egos. But Damian Winters was something else entirely. The first time I stepped into his world, I felt like I was in the presence of something untouchable, something intangible. His house was a mansion in the hills, hidden behind towering gates and walls of ivy, almost as if it had been built to shut the world out. The windows were all closed off, and the place had an eerie, almost haunting quality to it. This was a man who hadn't just stepped away from the spotlight. He'd erased himself from it. When I walked in, Damian was sitting in the center of the room, still and calm. His dark hair was slightly longer than I had imagined, and his eyes, those dark, stormy eyes, held a certain mystery. The man looked older than I expected, but there was something about him that was undeniably magnetic. "Mr. Hughes," he said, his voice smooth like honey, cutting through the silence. "I imagine you came here with a set of questions. You may ask them now." His tone wasn't cold, but there was a certain detachment to it, as if he had heard it all before. I had prepared myself for the hard-hitting questions, the confrontation, but what I didn't anticipate was the way he looked at me. It wasn't just curiosity. It was like he saw straight through me, as if he knew my every thought before I even spoke it. I sat across from him, flipping through my notes, trying to maintain some semblance of professionalism. But there was a pull there, something in the way he looked at me that made it hard to focus. He wasn't like the other celebrities I had covered. There was an intensity to him, a depth that I wasn't prepared for. "So, what exactly is it you want from me, Mr. Hughes?" he asked, his gaze never leaving mine. The question caught me off guard, and I had to fight to keep my composure. "The truth," I answered, even though I wasn't entirely sure what that meant anymore. I had come here to uncover his secrets, his past, the things he had buried. But now, I wasn't so sure I wanted to dig into the darkness of his life. The man sitting in front of me didn't seem like the monster the tabloids had painted him to be. "I'm sure you already know that the public doesn't understand me," Damian continued, his voice softening just a bit. "The truth isn't always as simple as they want it to be. You'll find things you don't expect." His words hung in the air, heavy with something I couldn't quite grasp. I knew what I had to do, but suddenly, I wasn't so sure I wanted to expose him. I had been assigned to tear down his walls, but in the presence of this man, this broken, yet somehow whole man, I wasn't sure I could. Over the next few days, I spent more time at his estate, delving into his history, his career, the people who had worked with him. I tried to stay professional, keeping my distance, but every encounter felt like a slow unraveling. Damian wasn't what I had expected. The stories of his temper, his egotism, the rumors of his dark past, none of them seemed to fit the person I was meeting. Yes, he was distant and aloof, but there was a vulnerability to him, something raw that no one seemed to understand. One evening, I stayed later than usual, going over some old interviews with him. As I read through the words, I felt his presence before I even heard him. He walked into the room, as silent as a shadow, and watched me for a moment. "Still searching for answers?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I looked up at him, caught off guard. "It's my job," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I realized how hollow they sounded. "What about you? What are you running from?" Damian's expression softened, his eyes flickering with something I hadn't seen before. It was almost like a fleeting moment of surrender, a crack in his carefully crafted persona. "I'm not running," he replied quietly. "I'm hiding." The honesty in his words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I should push for more, or if I should just let it go. But something inside me urged me to ask. Why? I asked, my voice almost trembling. He stood there, staring out the window, and I thought for a moment he wouldn't answer. But then he turned back to me, his face unreadable. Because sometimes the truth is more dangerous than the lie, he said, his voice low. And some things are better left buried. I wasn't supposed to get this close. I had a job to do, a mission to complete. But as the days wore on, I found myself drawn to him in ways I hadn't anticipated. There was something about Damien that wasn't just the man behind the fame. It was the man underneath it all. The vulnerability, the pain, the secrets he carried. And as much as I tried to keep my distance, I knew I was in too deep. I hadn't meant to get close to him. I hadn't meant to feel this pull. But here I was, standing at the edge of something I couldn't walk away from. I thought I was uncovering secrets, but the truth about Damien was more complicated than I ever imagined. As the days passed, I found myself spending more time in Damien's world, not just as an investigative reporter, but as someone who was beginning to understand that there was more to him than the media portrayed. He wasn't just some eccentric recluse who disappeared from the spotlight. There was a depth to him that no one seemed to grasp. Behind the closed doors of his estate, away from the cameras and the public, there was a man who carried the weight of a painful past. A man who had been broken, scarred in ways I couldn't yet understand. At first, I convinced myself that I was still just doing my job. I was here to uncover the truth about the man who had spent years hiding in the shadows. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized that I wasn't just learning about him. I was becoming entangled in his world, emotionally and intellectually. Damien wasn't the man everyone thought he was. The fame, the rumors, the mystery surrounding him, it was all just a mask. And the more I saw of the real man, the more my curiosity turned into something else, something personal. It wasn't hard to notice how guarded Damien was. He had learned how to keep people at arm's length. When we first met, his cool, distant demeanor had made it clear that he wasn't interested in playing games with me. He had built his walls high, brick by brick, over the years. But as I spent more time with him, those walls started to crack, just a little. He would give me fleeting glimpses into his life, bits and pieces of his thoughts, his ideas. They were all carefully controlled, of course. He wouldn't let me get too close, but I could sense that, deep down, he wanted to. There were moments, like when we would sit across from each other in his study, the air thick with unspoken words, when I could almost see the man he used to be. The man before the fame, before the tragedy. It was in the way he would stare off into space as if lost in a memory, his jaw clenched in silent frustration. Or when he would speak about his films, the passion and the pain in his voice. He wasn't just a director. He was an artist who had bled his soul into every frame of film. But it was one question, one innocent question, that changed everything. I had been working late one evening, sifting through old interviews and articles, trying to piece together the narrative of his life. Damien was sitting at his desk, surrounded by scattered papers and empty cups of coffee, his brow furrowed in concentration. I had come across a name, his brother's name, to be exact. It was a detail that had barely ever been mentioned in the public eye, and I couldn't resist asking. So, Damien, I noticed that no one ever talks about your family. What happened to your brother? There's hardly any mention of him in the interviews or your films. Was there a falling out? The moment the words left my mouth, I saw it, the shift in his expression. His shoulders stiffened, and his eyes darkened, like a storm cloud passing over his face. It was so subtle, so quick, that if I hadn't been paying close attention, I might have missed it. But I didn't. I saw the change, and it felt like a punch to my gut. He stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back with a sharp scrape against the wooden floor. "That's none of your business, Albert," he snapped, his voice laced with an edge I hadn't heard before. I immediately regretted the question. I had crossed a line I couldn't come back from. "I'm sorry," I said quickly, standing up to try and bridge the sudden distance between us. I didn't mean to, but he was already walking away, his footsteps heavy as they echoed through the silent room. "Just drop it," he muttered over his shoulder. I sat back down, my heart racing. What had I done? I had pried too deeply too soon. I had seen a side of Damien that I wasn't supposed to see, the cold, defensive side of him that no one else knew about. I had pushed him to the edge, and now I had no idea how to fix it. But even as he withdrew, I couldn't help but feel that there was something behind the wall he had erected, a pain so deep and raw that it scared him more than anything else. I had pushed him, but in doing so, I had also uncovered a glimpse of the man who was more than just a recluse or a director. He was someone who had suffered, someone who had been shattered by a past he wasn't ready to confront. And now, as I sat in the silence of his empty study, I knew that uncovering the truth about Damian Winters wasn't going to be as simple as digging through his past. There was a complexity to him that I had underestimated, a complexity that I didn't know how to navigate. The next day, Damian was distant. He barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was only about the film, about business, never about anything personal. I had crossed a line, and he was making sure I knew it. But even as I tried to distance myself emotionally, a part of me couldn't help but feel that I had only scratched the surface. There was so much more to him, so much more that he wasn't willing to share. And as much as he tried to shut me out, I couldn't walk away. There was something about him, something that made me want to protect him, to find out what had happened to him, what had broken him. I had come here to uncover the truth. But what I was starting to realize was that the truth about Damian Winters was far more complicated than I ever could have imagined. And maybe, just maybe, the real truth was something that neither of us was ready to face. Then there was a touch. Yeah, I know, it was just a touch, a fleeting moment. But it lingered in my mind long after he left. I hadn't expected it. No, I never thought anything like this would happen. We were deep into a discussion about one of his films, one of his older works, one that had put him on the map. I was so focused on the analysis, the technical aspects, trying to dig deeper for the story, that I barely noticed how close we were sitting. It wasn't until his hand brushed against mine that I froze. At first, I thought it was an accident, just a careless move in the middle of our conversation. But when his fingers lingered, when they didn't pull away immediately, I felt something shift in the air. It was subtle, like the briefest of touches, but it was enough to stop my heart. My eyes met his, and for a moment, the world around us disappeared. There were no flashing cameras, no deadlines, no report to file, just him. His eyes, so full of depth, were locked onto mine. There was a flicker there, something raw and unspoken, a flicker that mirrored my own confusion. He was fighting something. I could see it, the tension in his jaw, the way his body seemed to stiffen, the way he was trying to keep control. It was a fleeting moment, yes. But it stayed with me long after he left, long after the conversation shifted back to the mundane details of his work. I was a reporter. My job was to get the truth, not fall for the man I was investigating. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about that touch, that moment. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel the warmth of his skin against mine. It was insane, I knew that. I had come here to uncover Damian Winters' secrets, to unearth the man behind the fame. But now, it seemed like I had uncovered something far more dangerous, my own feelings for him. The more I spent time with him, the harder it became to keep my distance. The lines between reporter and subject blurred with each passing hour. Damian had a way of drawing me in, not just with his films or his fame, but with his quiet presence. His voice, rich with unspoken pain and wisdom, reverberated in my mind long after our conversations ended. His eyes, they saw too much, as if he could look right through me, straight into my soul. He had this way of making everything feel significant, even the smallest details. A casual glance, a shared laugh over a cup of coffee, a moment of silence where words weren't needed, and yet everything was said. He understood me in ways I couldn't explain. And I hated it, because I wasn't supposed to feel this way. I wasn't supposed to care, but I couldn't stop myself. No matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, I wanted him. The man who lived behind the mask of fame, who wore the persona of the untouchable genius. The man who deep down was just as broken as I was. He was a man with too many secrets, and I was just a reporter, a pawn in his story. What could he possibly see in me? We were sitting on the balcony of his mansion late one evening, the sun just beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and purple. The air was thick with the sound of distant crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Damian had been unusually quiet for most of the evening, and I was starting to wonder what was going on in his mind. "Damian, why did you leave the industry?" I asked quietly, unable to hold the question in any longer. It had been on my mind ever since I began investigating him, and I needed an answer, something beyond the vague rumors I'd heard. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked out over the vast garden below, his expression unreadable. I could see the tension in his posture, the way he clenched his jaw as if the question had reopened some old wound. "I didn't leave," he said finally, his voice rough, barely above a whisper. "I just faded away." I didn't know what to say to that. The pain in his voice was palpable. I reached out, hesitantly, to place my hand on his arm. The contact was gentle, but it was enough. He flinched at first, but then his muscles relaxed under my touch. It was a silent acknowledgement, something unspoken passing between us. I wanted to say something, anything, to comfort him, to show him that I understood. But the words never came. Instead, we both sat there in silence, the weight of our emotions hanging in the air, thicker than the night around us. For the briefest of moments, I felt like we were two souls caught in the same storm, connected by something deeper than just a professional relationship. But that thought terrified me. I was a reporter. He was a man with too many secrets. This was never supposed to happen. But as the days went on, I couldn't deny it any longer. I was falling for him, and the lines between reporter and subject had long since disappeared. What was I doing? I had been trained to remain objective, detached. But Damien, he wasn't just a story. He wasn't just an assignment. He was a man who had captivated me in ways I didn't understand, a man whose past was as complicated as his present. And I, for all my journalistic training, was too far gone to turn back. The story had become my heart, and Damien Winters was the key to both. I thought I knew what loneliness was, but then I saw the cage Damien had built around himself. It was raining that night, not a heavy storm, but a steady, soft drizzle that blurred the edges of the world and made everything feel suspended in time. We had stayed out later than usual, talking about things that had nothing to do with film or fame. For the first time, Damien wasn't the guarded, elusive figure I had been sent to investigate. He was just a man. Tired. Wounded. Real. As we reached the gate of his estate, he didn't let go of the conversation. He invited me in, his voice low and hesitant, as if afraid I might say no. I followed him inside, expecting nothing more than a drink, maybe another hour of intimate dialogue. But that night, everything changed. We sat in his study, a room that looked untouched by time. Leather-bound books, half-empty glasses of forgotten scotch, film awards that caught the light like ghosts of past glories. He poured us both a drink, his hands shaking slightly. I noticed, and so did he. "I wasn't always like this," he murmured, not meeting my eyes. "I used to believe in people. In connection." He paused, then looked up. "Then they took everything. The press, the industry, the lies. They twisted the truth until I couldn't recognize myself anymore. So I disappeared." There was no bitterness in his tone, only exhaustion. And then slowly, he began to tell me everything. The betrayal of his closest friend. The scandal that destroyed his career. The death of someone he had loved. A story the world had speculated on for years, but never truly knew. He didn't cry, but his voice faltered, and the weight of his words filled the room like smoke. That's when I realized he wasn't hiding from fame. He was hiding from pain. From people. From the world. He had built a prison out of isolation, and now he didn't know how to leave it. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. One moment, I was asking him questions, and the next, he kissed me and we made love that night. It began so quietly I almost missed it. I asked something, softly, carefully, about the person he lost. His eyes darkened, but he didn't snap like he usually did when I touched a nerve. Instead, he stood up, walked to the fireplace, and stared at the dying embers. "I don't talk about him," he said, voice flat. "Not because I can't, but because the moment I do, he becomes someone else's story. And he deserves more than that." Silence stretched between us. I stood too, walking slowly toward him. I didn't touch him. I didn't speak. I just stood beside him, breathing the same air, feeling the same grief. Then he turned to me and kissed me. It was not desperate or hungry. It was slow, hesitant, almost fragile, like he was testing whether something good could still exist in his world. For a second, I was frozen, overwhelmed by the intensity of it all. But when I kissed him back, everything else vanished, the story, the job, the ethics. All of it. It was just us. The kiss deepened. He led me through the house, not with words but with glances, silent questions asked and answered in the spaces between touch and breath. His bedroom was dark, spare, like a room long unused. Yet in that moment, it became sacred. When we made love, it wasn't perfect or practiced. It was clumsy, tender, real. There were moments he paused, as though remembering something painful, and I touched his face, grounding him in the present. There were moments I lost myself in his body, in the way he moved, in the way he whispered my name like it meant something. For that one night, we were two broken people finding warmth in each other's fire. Two ghosts trying to feel alive again. Afterwards, we lay there in silence, our fingers entwined, our breathing slowly returning to normal. The storm outside had passed, but I could still hear the occasional drip from the eaves. Damien was staring at the ceiling. "You were never supposed to get this close," he whispered. I didn't answer, because neither was he. But we were here now, and nothing would ever be the same again. As much as I wanted to protect him, the truth couldn't stay buried forever. It started with a headline. A cleverly worded exposé from a rival journalist. Someone I knew, someone I had shared newsroom drinks with. The headline was subtle enough not to scream scandal but ominous enough to stir the waters. The vanishing act of Damien Winters. What he doesn't want you to know. Within 24 hours, it spread like wildfire. Photos. Names. Dates. Whispers about his past, some half-true, most exaggerated but all dangerous. And somewhere in the flurry of speculation, a grain of truth bled through. Someone had uncovered the name of the man Damien once loved. The man he lost. The man whose death had nearly destroyed him. I remember the moment I saw the article. Damien was still asleep, the sheets tangled around his legs, his face peaceful in a way I rarely saw. I sat at the edge of the bed with my phone in hand, my heart sinking as I read. They had found the things he had trusted me with. Things I never wrote down. Which meant only one thing. Someone else had been watching, digging, feeding the frenzy I had tried so hard to avoid. When he woke, I didn't know how to tell him. But I didn't need to. The look on my face said it all. He didn't speak for a long time. He just stood, crossed the room, and stared out the window. "They know," he finally said. His voice was flat. "Empty." "Yes." He turned to me then. "Did you?" "No," I cut him off. "I would never." He nodded slowly. But the crack had already formed. The press wasn't just after the story anymore. They were after us. It didn't take long before the world noticed what was between us. Maybe it was the way I had stopped submitting articles, or the fact that we were now seen in public just a little too often. Maybe it was the photographs, grainy shots of us leaving restaurants, him brushing his fingers against mine, me looking at him like he was my entire world. When the tabloids caught wind of it, the coverage shifted. No longer just Damien Winters, broken director, but Damien Winters and his mysterious new flame. My face plastered alongside his, twisted into narratives I never wrote. "The reporter who got too close," one headline said. "Lover or leech," another jeered. It was vicious, speculative, cruel. And Damien, he shut down. The fragile progress he had made began to fracture. He stopped answering calls. Refused interviews. The front gate was constantly swarmed with photographers, and we had to sneak out through the back alley just to breathe. In one of the quieter moments, he looked at me with something I couldn't quite name. "I knew being with me would cost you everything," he said. I reached for his hand. "You're not a cost, Damien. You're a choice." But the truth is, it was costing me my credibility, my job, my safety. I had to make a decision. Return to the safety of my career, or stand beside a man who was being ripped apart by a world that didn't care about the truth. I chose him. One night, after another wave of stories dropped, we escaped the city. Damien drove us to a cabin in the mountains, hidden beneath towering pines and snow-covered silence. We sat by the fire, both of us wrapped in silence too heavy for words. "I'm not used to people staying," he murmured. I looked at him, tired but sure. "I'm not leaving." And he kissed me. Slowly. Like a thank you, like an apology, like a promise. But I knew this peace wouldn't last. Because secrets never die quietly. And love doesn't make you invisible. It makes you a target. I thought I could protect him, but I didn't realize how much I was risking. There's a kind of silence that only exists after something shatters, A silence that buzzes with the ghost of what used to be. That was the sound in my ears as I lay on the ground, my blood pooling beneath me, my breath slipping away like mist. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the last normal moment we shared. We were in the kitchen, barefoot, talking about mundane things. What to eat, where to escape to next, how we would finally disappear from the noise. Damien looked at me like he always did now, with that soft gaze that had taken months to earn. I remember he laughed at something I said, something stupid, and he kissed my forehead and said, "You make the chaos bearable." I told him I loved him. I didn't say it often. I didn't need to. But that night I said it out loud twice, just to make sure he heard me. And then the lights went out. Literally. First the lamps flickered, then the power cut. Just like that. A snap, a darkness, and then glass shattering in the hallway. Footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Wrong. Damien's eyes widened. "No," he whispered. "Not now. Not here." He reached for the drawer under the kitchen island. One I hadn't even known had a gun in it. "Albert," he said, urgent now. "Get behind me." I didn't argue. For once, I didn't ask questions. But it didn't matter. They weren't after him alone. They came in fast, faces masked, voices calm and practiced. Professionals. No threats. No warnings. Just bullets. I don't remember the exact moment I was hit. Just a sharp bloom of pain, a warmth that spread too quickly, too deep. I dropped. Damien screamed. And then everything blurred. The night everything changed was the night I lost him. He dropped to his knees beside me, hands covered in blood, my blood. He pressed down hard, begging me to stay awake. There was so much he said in those moments, but I only caught fragments. "I'm sorry. This is my fault. Stay with me, please." I wanted to tell him not to cry. I wanted to tell him I didn't regret anything. That I had loved him freely, without shame, without conditions. That I would do it all over again, even knowing how it ended. But I couldn't speak. My lungs were collapsing. My eyes kept closing. The last thing I saw before everything turned black was his face. Damien. Terrified. Broken. Helpless. And then nothing. There was no warning. No way to prepare. I had always known there were things in Damien's past that could ruin him. I just never imagined they'd take me instead. This wasn't the end I wanted. But maybe it was the one we were always heading toward. Because when you love someone the world wants to destroy, you don't get fairy tales. You get fire. You get loss. You get remembered as the reporter who got too close. But I wasn't just a reporter. I was his. And if dying for him meant protecting him, I gladly laid down my life for Damien Winters.